Alcoholic fermentation. The second type of fermentation is known as alcoholic fermentation. In the absence of oxygen, bacteria and yeasts work in tandem, transforming the sugars in the substrate into ethanol and CO2. Wine, beer, and bread are all examples of alcoholic fermentation. For this segment, we will be looking at how alcoholic fermentation transforms wheat flour and water into a nutritional loaf of sourdough bread. Sourdough bread. There are many kinds of fermented grain staples that have prevailed around the world for centuries. However, few have risen to the heights of worldwide stardom that wheat and bread hold. Bread produced by starter cultures such as sourdough have been staples among mankind for thousands of years. It is important to examine the microbial transformations that take place during fermentation that make this bread more digestible and improve nutrient bioavailability. Unlike sauerkraut, the microbes in sourdough bread expire as they are baked, but impart health benefits through pre-digestion of the substrate and increased nutrient content in the final loaf. Sourdough bread is made using a natural starter, also known as a mother, which is teeming with microbial life. A great loaf of sourdough can be as simple as water, wheat flour, and salt, but through the fermentation process develops deep and complex flavors and its characteristic sour tang. Sourdough is only just one example of a huge variety of leavened breads humans have been enjoying for millennia. A simple mixture of water and flour, when fermented, results in a sourdough starter that is alive with microbes. Lactic acid bacteria, or lab, and wild yeasts, such as the fermentation superstar Saccharomyces cerevisiae, live in harmony in the slurry. When a starter is periodically fed with fresh water and flour, it rises and bubbles with activity as the yeasts in lab consume sugars present in the flour. As in the case of lab-fermented sauerkraut or yogurt, the bacteria convert the lactose into lactic and acetic acids. This lowers the pH of the starter and gives the bread that characteristic sour taste. Lactic acid fermentation in sourdough also improves the texture, flavor, and volume of the final loaf. The naturally occurring acids, alcohols, and bacteria that are the byproducts of microbial activity of sourdough production extend the shelf life of the bread and will mold and go stale less quickly as a result. As I said, the texture, flavor, and smell of the bread transforms as a result of the fermentation and baking. Once the first rise of the dough occurs, the gluten present in wheat flour, a protein which provides a chewy texture in the final loaf, relaxes and allows the microbes present to consume the sugars present in the flour. Yeast produces alcohol as well as carbon dioxide, which gets trapped in pockets in the dough, allowing it to rise. Those air pockets are baked into the dough, resulting in a final loaf that is airy and chewy. A longer fermentation process also contributes to a deeper and more complex flavors once the bread is baked. Health benefits. Unlike with lacto-fermented products such as yogurt or sauerkraut, which contain live microbes which impart health benefits in the form of probiotics, the microbes in bread are no longer active as a result of the baking process. However, that doesn't lessen their significance in improving the health benefits in sourdough. Whole grains, that is flour with the germ and bran intact, are rich in dietary fiber, vitamins, minerals, including calcium, potassium, magnesium, iron, zinc, phosphorus, phytochemicals, and endogenous enzymes. During fermentation, these enzymes are activated and impact the nutritional quality of the final product. However, the presence of phytate or phytic acid in wheat flour can potentially impair mineral absorption in humans. Fortunately, due to the lower pH achieved during fermentation, phytate content is lowered and the mineral bioavailability is increased. Fermentation can also improve the retention of vitamins during the baking process, as yeast favors the formation of folates, also known as vitamin B9, and thiamine or vitamin B1. Furthermore, Sourdough fermentation has also been shown to lower the glycemic index of wheat bread. Glycemic index, or GI, is a measurement of how quickly blood glucose levels rise after eating certain foods. During fermentation, microbes pre-digest the substrate, which improves the digestibility of the final product for human consumption. Beyond sourdough. Sourdough starters can be used beyond the production of bread, giving life and new flavors to pancakes or even cookies. The science behind a starter also has a potential to improve gluten-free products on the market. Celiac disease is a growing problem among wheat lovers. Some argue that the use of vital gluten in baked goods, overconsumption of wheat, and modern wheat breeding has led to increased levels of celiac disease, although this is still debated. Thankfully, gluten-free options continue to improve, and the application of sourdough fermentation methods open up more possibilities for improving the flavor, texture, and nutritional value of gluten-free products. Commercial production. Through scientific achievements, what was once a wild microbe transforming our food unbeknownst to us was identified and reproduced into a commercial yeast cake and later sold as the dry shelf stable form we know today. Commercial yeast, along with modern farming and milling practices, led to the expansion of mass-produced commercial white bread. In many ways, a pre-industrial loaf of crusty sourdough bread bears little resemblance to the modern loaf of fluffy, soft, plastic-wrapped white bread. To achieve the desired texture, airiness, and whiteness of a commercial bread loaf, it is necessary to add emulsifiers, preservatives, and other chemical additives that improve texture and lengthen the shelf life of commercial breads. Mass-produced breads have become the standard in most countries where homemade bread was once the norm. Sourdough bread production is a time and labor-intensive process due to the longer fermentation required because of the lower yeast levels in a wild sourdough starter. A sourdough starter is much more complex than the commercial yeast one can find on grocery store shelves, which is a dehydrated form of Saccharomyces cerevisiae. Commercial yeasts may speed up the fermentation process, but slow fermentation of sourdough production yields a deeper and more complex flavor, often with that trademark acidity due to increased presence of acids, and contains more naturally occurring bacteria. Humans have made great strides in producing wheat to feed a growing population and commercial yeast to simplify the time-consuming process of making bread. However, with that, convenience and abundance has come certain trade-offs.